I want to see a world where we no longer use and abuse animals as we do today, when we don't use animals in medical research, when we stop having food animals in, little tiny pens with wobbly legs filled up with hormones and antibiotics.
Jane Goodall devoted her entire life to fighting for animal rights and conservation efforts. Unfortunately, the thing she devoted her life to would lead to her death. We have the details, and it's ugly. The viral footage. The viral footage exploded onto the internet with an immediacy that was both shocking and eerily inevitable, because Jane Goodall's life had always been defined by her proximity to animals, and for decades, the boundary line between admiration, coexistence, and danger had grown increasingly thin. The new video, released without warning in late September 2025, allegedly captured Goodall surrounded by chimpanzees during what appeared to be one of her last field excursions before her death on October 1st. The claims attached to the footage that the beloved primatologist was attacked by the very animals she had dedicated her life to protecting ignited a storm of speculation, disbelief, and outrage. On one side stood those insisting the clip was authentic, proof that Goodall's bond with the chimpanzees had always contained hidden risks. On the other, defenders argued it was selectively edited, misleading, and designed to sensationalize a woman whose final days were already marked by frailty and exhaustion. The fact remained, for millions scrolling through their feeds, the headline alone, Jane Goodall attacked before death, was more than enough to shatter the serene mythology built around her name. The viral spread was instantaneous because Jane Goodall was not simply a scientist, she was a global icon, revered as both an intellectual force and a moral compass. To see her legacy reframed in such violent terms was to watch the collapse of an untouchable figure. What gave the narrative its intensity was the timing. Goodall had died only days earlier, confirmed by the Jane Goodall Institute to have passed away from natural causes at the age of 91 while on tour in California, still lecturing, still fighting to spread her message of hope. She had been awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in January of the same year, cementing her role not only as the most famous primatologist in history, but as a symbol of endurance, activism, and wisdom. Her death triggered an avalanche of tributes from scientists, heads of state, and ordinary citizens, but the surfacing of the footage radically altered the tone of the conversation. Now, instead of focusing solely on her half-century of discoveries, from chimpanzee tool use to cultural variation, people debated whether her final moments were overshadowed by the darker truth she had always acknowledged. Chimpanzees are not domesticated, they are not safe, and living among them had always been a gamble. The narrative arc of Goodall's life seemed to have folded back on itself. She began as a fearless young woman stepping into the Tanzanian wilderness in 1960, and she ended, in the popular imagination at least, under attack from the same wilderness she spent decades humanizing. To understand the impact of this footage, one has to recall how carefully Goodall constructed her career around dismantling the idea of separation between human and animal. In her earliest work at Gombe Stream, she was criticized for giving the chimpanzees names instead of numbers, for describing their personalities in human-like terms, and for attributing to them emotions like grief, joy, jealousy, and love. But her persistence, coupled with her scientific rigor, forced the world to accept that these traits were not projections, they were observable, documentable realities. The 1960 observation of David Greybeard, stripping leaves from a twig to fish for termites, redefined humanity itself, compelling Louis Leakey to declare that either the definition of tool, the definition of man, or the status of chimpanzees had to change. Over the decades, Goodall unveiled more. She recorded cooperative hunting, strategic violence during the infamous 4-Year War, and acts of empathy such as adoption of orphans by unrelated adults. To the public, this work was always presented with a note of harmony, as though the chimpanzees were an extended family. But hidden within her observations was an unmistakable thread of danger. She had watched violent dominance struggles, brutal killings, and coordinated raids. She herself admitted that chimpanzees could be terrifying, unpredictable, and capable of aggression on par with humans. Thus, when the new footage circulated online, showing her in the middle of a group of chimps in what looked like escalating chaos, it struck viewers as plausible because it connected to the dual reality she had always presented. Chimpanzees are wondrously like us, and for that very reason, they are both nurturing and violent. GF to clips of Goodall speaking in her own words, spliced into commentary videos about the viral footage, added another layer of intensity. In one resurfaced interview, she declared,
I want to see a world where we no longer use and abuse animals as we do today, when we don't use animals in medical research, when we stop having food animals in, little tiny pens with wobbly legs filled up with hormones and antibiotics.
The haunting juxtaposition of these compassionate pleas with the apparent aggression she endured only amplified the tragic irony. Another viral cut used footage from her first dreams of Africa.
I don't want my great-grandchildren to only know chimps and gorillas and giraffes and elephants from books. And so, we are destroying our own future.
When overlaid with images of chimps swarming her, the narrative bent toward tragic symbolism. A woman who gave her life to preserving the future of these animals, seemingly endangered by them at the end. The frenzy surrounding the footage was not simply about the content, but about what it represented. Jane Goodall was one of the last living figures from an era of exploration and discovery that felt almost mythical. Alongside Dian Fossey and Birute Galdikas, she was one of Leakey's trimates, women who redefined the study of great apes. Fossey's story had ended violently in 1985, murdered in her Rwandan cabin, a crime that underscored the brutality of human greed and poaching. Galdikas continued her work with orangutans, but never reached the same level of public recognition. Goodall, however, had ascended into the realm of saint-like status. She was dubbed a UN Messenger of Peace, awarded countless honors, and maintained a globe-spanning lecture schedule even into her 10th decade. Her passing had already been framed as the peaceful conclusion to a monumental life, and the release of the footage disrupted that script. Suddenly, her death was entangled in doubt. Was the official cause of natural death a protective cover, shielding the world from the reality that she had been fatally injured in an encounter with her chimpanzees? The Jane Goodall Institute denied these claims outright, yet the internet thrives on distrust of official statements. In an environment where conspiracy theories flourish, the idea that the truth was being hidden became irresistible. Hashtags like Tsar Goodall attack and Tsar hidden truth trended globally, fueling endless speculation videos dissecting every second of the shaky footage. Adding fuel to the fire was the fact that Goodall's death came at a moment when she was still fully active in public life. In September 2025, only weeks before her passing, she had delivered keynote speeches on conservation, appearing frail but determined. Videos of these events circulated widely after her death, with audiences marveling at her clarity of thought and her refusal to retire. Her presence at youth events for Roots and Shoots, the educational program she founded, was evidence of her undiminished commitment. Thus, the suggestion that her final days had included an attack felt like an unthinkable disruption of the serenity she projected. It was not simply that Goodall had been harmed, it was that the imagery of her harm threatened the mythology of a harmonious bond between human and animal that she spent her life defending. By the end of September, only days after her passing, the footage had been dissected in hundreds of YouTube exposés, TikTok theories, and Twitter threads. Professional media outlets cautiously reported on the video, often emphasizing its lack of verification, but inevitably amplifying its reach. The BBC, National Geographic, and The Guardian all ran pieces that attempted to refocus on her life's work, but audience attention remained glued to the clip. It was a case study in how viral media rewrites history in real time. For a woman who had dedicated her life to redefining the human-animal boundary, it was perhaps fitting, if cruelly ironic, that her final public image was caught in the blur between fascination and fear. Decades of conservation. The circulation of the footage was not the end of the story, but the ignition point for a far larger explosion of debate, investigation, and conspiracy. What began as a 30-second shaky clip soon fractured into thousands of interpretations, each more elaborate than the last, because Jane Goodall's relationship with chimpanzees had always carried layers of complexity that lent themselves to reinterpretation. The public knew her as the gentle scientist who sat quietly in the forests of Gombe with notebooks, but within academic archives and her own books, there was ample evidence of the chimpanzee's volatility, aggression, and danger. What made the footage powerful was not only the implication that she had been physically harmed, but the way it fit into pre-existing narratives about the darker side of her research. To understand why this clip, out of the millions of animal videos uploaded daily, detonated so explosively, one has to reconstruct both the visible content of the video and the invisible history behind it. Experts were swiftly drawn into the debate, many of them invoking Goodall's own published work. In The Chimpanzees of Gombe, she had described intergroup warfare, lethal violence, and infanticide among chimpanzees, painting a picture of societies capable of cruelty and conflict alongside tenderness and cooperation. These accounts shocked the scientific community in the 1970s because they disrupted the myth of the gentle ape. As commentators resurrected these passages, the viral narrative gained weight. If chimpanzees could kill each other, why not harm Goodall? The footage seemed to confirm what she had always warned, that to anthropomorphize chimpanzees was dangerous because because it ignored their full spectrum of behavior. Ironically, Goodall herself was often accused of anthropomorphism by critics who believed naming the chimpanzees and describing their personalities blurred scientific objectivity. But in retrospect, her warnings about their aggression were undeniable. The tragedy was that the viral narrative transformed those warnings into prophecy, as though Goodall's final days had been a grim enactment of the dangers she chronicled. The conspiracy theories that followed were immediate and multi-pronged. The first claimed that the Jane Goodall Institute had deliberately suppressed details of her final interactions with the chimpanzees, releasing a sanitized account of her death as natural causes to preserve her saintly image and to protect fundraising streams. According to this theory, the Institute feared that a narrative of Goodall being attacked by chimps would devastate public trust, damage conservation donations, and undermine 6 decades of work portraying chimpanzees as endangered beings worth saving. Viral threads speculated that the footage had been leaked by an insider, perhaps a disillusioned employee or a whistleblower who wanted the public to see the truth. Hashtags like #JGI cover-up and #leaked Goodall footage trended, with some insisting that mainstream media's cautious handling of the video was proof of collusion. Supporters of this view pointed to the way initial press releases about her death contained no details beyond natural causes, and the swiftness with which the Institute moved to emphasize her legacy rather than circumstances. Another branch of conspiracy accused governments of involvement. Jane Goodall had been a UN messenger of peace, an outspoken critic of deforestation, climate change, and industrial farming practices. She had clashed with corporate and political interests for decades, insisting on radical reforms to protect the environment. For these theorists, the footage was not merely about chimpanzees, but about silencing a powerful activist at a time when her influence was inconvenient. They speculated that the clip was released strategically to undermine her credibility, portraying her as a frail woman unable to control the very animals she defended. In this narrative, her natural death was questioned, recast as a smokescreen for something more sinister. Why, they asked, had she been in such close proximity to wild chimps at age 91? Who allowed her access without safeguards? And why was there a camera recording at that exact moment? Theories spiraled into suggestions of staged incidents, manipulated footage, or even covert operations to embarrass her before death. To make sense of these theories, one must return to the fundamental duality in Goodall's career, her role as both scientist and activist. As a scientist, she provided the world with the most comprehensive longitudinal study of chimpanzees, documenting not just behaviors, but lineages, social structures, and cultures. As an activist, she used those discoveries to argue that chimpanzees, and by extension other animals, deserved rights, protections, and respect. This duality always carried tension. Scientists warned that advocacy might compromise objectivity, while activists worried that her accounts of chimpanzee violence might damage empathy. The footage reignited that tension in its most extreme form. To her detractors, it was proof that her advocacy was naive, that she romanticized dangerous animals. To her supporters, it was irrelevant, because her life's work was about respecting animals in their fullness, not domesticating them. The conspiracies flourished precisely because the footage tapped into this unresolved contradiction. At the same time, the clip invited forensic scrutiny from digital experts. Analysts debated whether the footage had been manipulated, citing discrepancies in lighting, shadows, and audio. Some argued it was authentic, but incomplete, noting abrupt cuts that could conceal the aftermath. Others speculated it was archival, perhaps decades old, repurposed to appear recent. The lack of official clarity only deepened suspicion. The Jane Goodall Institute's refusal to comment on the clip beyond calling it misleading was interpreted by conspiracy theorists as a tacit admission of authenticity. In online ecosystems where distrust of institutions is default, silence is rarely seen as restraint. It is seen as proof of guilt. The social media storm intersected with the rise of deepfake technology, further complicating perception. Viewers asked whether Goodall's voice in the clip was genuine or artificially generated. Could the entire video be a fabrication designed to smear her reputation? The fact that she had passed away, unable to confirm or deny, created a vacuum filled with conjecture. In this context, resurfaced interviews took on eerie new meaning. In one clip from her 85th birthday appearance on Ellen, she mused about the closeness of humans and chimps, noting their 98.6% genetic similarity.
They're 98%?
Well, people differ. 98.6 is what I was told. and then next come gorilla, and then orangutan.
Online commentators paired this with the viral attack clip to argue that her words foreshadowed her downfall, that the closeness between humans and chimps was not only about empathy, but also about shared capacity for violence. Meanwhile, scientists attempted to ground the debate in data. They reminded the public that chimpanzee attacks on humans, while rare, are not unheard of, particularly when humans encroach on their habitats or when chimps are provoked. Cases in Uganda and Sierra Leone have documented chimps inflicting severe injuries. Goodall herself had noted chimpanzees throwing stones at intruders or charging at perceived threats. Yet these incidents were usually contextual, not random acts of aggression. To claim that Goodall was fatally attacked required ignoring both her expertise in handling such situations and the Institute's clear statement of natural death. But conspiracy thrives on selective evidence, and the footage, stripped of context, seemed to provide precisely what was needed to sustain the narrative. The question of why the footage surfaced when it did became central. Some theorists argued that it was timed to coincide with her death, ensuring maximum impact by collapsing tribute and scandal into a single moment. Others suggested it had been circulating quietly for months or years, but was only pushed into prominence after her passing, perhaps by those seeking attention or profit. Whatever the origin, the effect was to blur the boundary between reality and rumor. Jane Goodall, who had spent her life clarifying the boundary between human and animal, was now caught in the opposite process. Her memory clouded by distortion, her legacy reshaped by viral noise. There was also the symbolic dimension. Goodall represented more than science. She embodied hope. Her mantra that every individual makes a difference was quoted endlessly in classrooms, conferences, and activism campaigns. The footage, therefore, struck at the heart of that hope. If even Jane Goodall could be harmed by the animals she loved, what did that say about the possibility of harmony between humans and nature? The conspiracies exploited this symbolism, framing her as a martyr, a silenced voice, or a victim of betrayal by the very creatures she defended. In all versions, her death became more than personal. It became allegorical, a stage for projecting fears about environmental collapse, human arrogance, and the dangers of idealism. The conspiratorial atmosphere spread beyond Goodall herself, enveloping the entire field of conservation. Some accused sanctuaries of hiding the dangers of close animal contact, arguing that the ecotourism model was built on illusions of safety. Others questioned the ethics of decades of field research, suggesting that habituating chimpanzees to human presence had destabilized their natural behaviors and increased risk to both humans and animals. These critiques echoed long-standing debates within primatology, but were now amplified by viral anger. The idea that Goodall's legacy might be reinterpreted not as triumph, but as cautionary tale gained traction, threatening to rewrite half a century of scientific history in the court of public opinion. In this way, the viral clip functioned less as evidence of one moment and more as a prism refracting every unresolved debate about science, activism, conservation, and truth. Was Jane Goodall the saintly figure she appeared to be, or was her career built on dangerous romanticization? Did the Institute cover up her true final moments, or were conspiracy theorists exploiting grief for clicks? Was the footage authentic, staged, or manipulated? The lack of closure guaranteed endless cycles of speculation. Each new theory, each new analysis, each new viral post layered another distortion onto the narrative. And so, part 2 of this unfolding saga reveals not only the footage, but the ecosystem it entered. An ecosystem where truth competes with rumor, where science collides with conspiracy, and where the legacy of a woman who dedicated her life to understanding chimpanzees is recast in the most sensational, divisive, and haunting terms possible. What remains constant through the noise is the raw fact that the viral video exists, and that its timing with Jane Goodall's death ensures it will forever be entangled with her memory. Whether authentic or fabricated, it has become part of her story, and in the digital age, perception often outweighs fact. Life and legacy. The weeks following Jane Goodall's death became a crucible in which her legacy was tested, reshaped, and fought over. The viral footage had already rewritten the narrative of her final days, and now the battle for her memory escalated across media, academia, and public consciousness. In ordinary circumstances, the death of a 91-year-old scientist from natural causes would inspire tributes, retrospectives, and measured appreciation. But with the attack footage in circulation, every commemoration became a contested space. Was she to be remembered as the serene observer who transcended transformed our understanding of chimpanzees, or as a cautionary tale of a woman fatally entangled in the dangers of her own idealism. The viral storm ensured there could be no consensus. Instead, her image fractured into multiple competing versions, each anchored in different interpretations of the same ambiguous footage. Public mourning carried the weight of contradiction. Candlelight vigils, organized by the Goodall Institute, drew thousands, with attendees reading passages from her books and quoting her lifelong mantra that every individual makes a difference. At the same time, protesters appeared at these events holding signs that read, "Tell the truth about Gombe" and "No more cover-ups." Online memorials were similarly divided. Instagram posts celebrating her life were flooded with comments demanding disclosure about the video, while Twitter threads intended as tributes devolved into debates about whether she had been betrayed by her chimpanzees. The intimacy of digital mourning collided with the virality of digital scandal, creating a surreal environment in which grief and outrage were inseparable. Mainstream media outlets struggled to strike balance. The BBC ran a headline, "Jane Goodall, A Life of Discovery Ends in Mystery," that attempted to honor her while acknowledging the viral controversy. The Guardian focused on her scientific contributions, but noted in passing the unverified footage shaping online narratives. National Geographic, the magazine that had once built her legend with iconic images of her and David Greybeard, published a lengthy obituary that ignored the footage entirely, prompting criticism for sanitizing her story. By avoiding direct engagement, these outlets inadvertently confirmed suspicions for conspiracy-minded audiences that the truth was being buried. In an age of suspicion, silence was interpreted as complicity. The fallout also extended to the scientific community. Universities that had partnered with the Jane Goodall Institute on long-term fieldwork found themselves inundated with requests for comment. Scholars debated whether addressing the footage lent it credibility or whether ignoring it allowed misinformation to spread unchecked. Some, seeking to reclaim control, emphasized that the real measure of Goodall's legacy lay not in a single viral video, but in the 6 decades of longitudinal research she had initiated. They pointed to her documentation of tool use, her recognition of chimpanzee cultures, and her advocacy for animal rights as unparalleled contributions. Yet even these defenses often faltered, because audiences conditioned by viral culture demanded spectacle, not nuance. To say that her scientific achievements outweighed a single clip did little to quell curiosity about the clip itself. The conspiratorial narratives grew increasingly elaborate as time passed without resolution. Some claimed the video showed more than an attack, that it documented her actual final moments, and that "natural causes" was a cover phrase to disguise fatal injuries. Others linked the footage to broader agendas, alleging that corporations hostile to her environmental advocacy had orchestrated the leak to tarnish her reputation. A fringe faction even suggested that the footage revealed intentional exposure, that she had been placed in harm's way by handlers or colleagues in order to silence her. These theories thrived precisely because no authoritative narrative displaced them. The Jane Goodall Institute's repeated insistence on natural death lacked persuasive power in a digital ecosystem designed to distrust official statements. In this environment, Goodall's own words resurfaced with haunting resonance. Clips from interviews were reframed as prophetic warnings. In one, she told an interviewer,
"I want to see a world where we no longer use and abuse animals as we do today."
In the wake of the footage, commentators declared that her plea for compassion had been met with betrayal, that the animals she championed had ultimately rejected her. In another clip, she recounted her childhood dream of going to Africa to live with animals and write books about them, recalling that everyone laughed except her mother.
You have to work really hard, take advantage of all opportunities, but don't give up.
Spliced into conspiracy videos, these words were cast as foreshadowing, a life of relentless pursuit culminating in a tragic end. The recontextualization of her own voice illustrated the brutal mechanics of virality, in which meaning is not fixed, but endlessly reconfigured to serve new narratives. Beyond the conspiracies, a more sober reckoning unfolded among conservationists. The footage, regardless of authenticity, forced a conversation about the dangers of anthropomorphism, the ethics of close human-animal contact, and the risks of building public campaigns around icons. Critics argued that Goodall's mythology had always glossed over the lethal potential of chimpanzees, creating an image of harmony that was never fully real. Supporters countered that her legacy was about understanding complexity, not denying danger, and that focusing on a single ambiguous clip distorted decades of balanced observation. The debate highlighted a paradox. Goodall had worked tirelessly to humanize chimpanzees, yet her death, and the viral imagery surrounding it, risked reanimalizing them in the public eye as violent threats. This reversal threatened to undo progress in empathy and conservation, precisely the outcome she had devoted her life to preventing. The fallout reached even into the sphere of policy. Lawmakers in the United States and Europe, responding to heightened public anxiety, proposed stricter regulations on human interaction with great apes, citing the Goodall footage as a cautionary example. Sanctuaries faced renewed scrutiny, with journalists investigating whether safety protocols were sufficient. In Tanzania, officials at Gombe National Park were compelled to issue statements reassuring the public that chimpanzee research continued safely, emphasizing that no tourists or researchers were at risk. Yet even these reassurances inadvertently reinforced the perception that there was something dangerous to be reassured about. The ripple effects of a single clip were global, shaping not only perception but policy. Her legacy endures, but altered. For some, she remains the visionary who redefined humanity's place in the natural world. For others, she is the symbol of idealism undone by reality. For all, she is now inseparable from the viral image that spread in the days after her death. Whether saint, victim, or conspiratorial figurehead, she belongs to history not as she lived it, but as we reframed it. And that, perhaps, is the final tragedy of Jane Goodall, that a woman who spent her life revealing truth about the animal kingdom left behind a legacy more entangled with rumor, speculation, and myth than with the clarity she so patiently cultivated. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.